standing in front of the bathroom mirror, making sure I looked just right. I was hosting Thanksgiving dinner for the first time. Family memories of overcooked turkey and tense arguments over politics had kept me from taking on the responsibility in the past. But this year, newly divorced and living alone in my cozy but tiny house, I felt ready to give it a try. The delicious aroma of roasting garlic and onions filled my quaint kitchen as I slid the turkey into the oven. Just as I was removing my oven mitts, the doorbell rang. Surprised anyone would be stopping by unannounced on Thanksgiving morning, I answered the door to find an elderly woman with snow-white hair. She introduced herself as Mrs. Mapleton, my neighbor from across the street. With arthritic hands, she passed me a floral teacup filled with cranberry sauce she had prepared specially for my dinner. I had never spoken to the woman before, yet here she was, grinning widely with her dreadful teeth, expecting an invite. Unsure how to respond, I simply thanked her for the kind gesture. But she did not leave. Mrs. Mapleton just stood there, eyeing me gleefully. With no reasonable way to refuse her hinted request, I mumbled an obligatory invitation to join us for dessert later. Her presence made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as holiday overeagerness. Hours passed uneventfully as turkey roasted to a glistening brown and I sang along to Christmas music. Optimistic I could pull off the perfect dinner party. But the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Mrs. Mapleton on my doorstep holding a candle and match. She insisted a temporary neighborhood blackout meant I needed the candle for my dinner. When had the lights gone out? I hadn't noticed. Politely declining the candle, I closed the door, double-checking the lock. Through the window I saw Mrs. Mapleton standing motionless on the front lawn, staring directly at me as she held the flickering candle flame beside her ancient face. How long was she planning to linger out there? And how did she seem to know about the supposedly unexpected power outage before it even happened? Growing increasingly uncomfortable with Mrs. Mapleton's lingering presence outside my home, I lowered the blinds and tried refocusing on final dinner prep. But I couldn't ignore the prickly feeling that I was still being watched. I decided I needed to get the woman away from my house immediately. I stepped out the front door and firmly told Mrs. Mapleton she was making me feel unsafe and that she needed to leave. But my neighbor just smiled wickedly, declaring that getting rid of her wouldn't be that easy. Suddenly, all the power went out on the entire street, plunging everything into darkness. I felt Mrs. Mapleton roughly grab my wrist, her usually weak grip now like a metal handcuff. She cackled that dinner was ready as she tried dragging me across the lawn while I screamed for help. We struggled violently until a sudden bright glare distracted her. Headlights from a passing car illuminated the deranged woman's wild eyes and a strange tattoo on her neck that seemed to shift shapes in the moving light. I wrenched myself free from the woman's grasp and fled back inside just as more cars approached to investigate the ruckus. Peering out my window, I watched dumbfounded as Mrs. Mapleton screamed curses at the sky before vanishing into thin air right before the driver's eyes. Power quickly restored itself while concerned neighbors converged on my lawn, everyone exchanging shocked accounts of the bizarre encounter. Though Mrs. Mapleton had disappeared and the immediate threat was over, a lingering chill still ran through me. I threw out the food, suddenly having lost my appetite for hosting Thanksgiving dinner. One of my guests arriving early took me aside and warned I should stop investigating that cold case if I knew what was good for me. But, how could anyone else know about that? None of this strange day made sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had marked me. Balancing two large brown paper grocery bags in my arms, I stopped to catch my breath on the front porch before tackling the 3 flights up to my apartment. I had spent the morning briskly walking to the nearest open store to gather ingredients for the Thanksgiving feast I was preparing for me and my niece Hannah. Her mom, my sister, was away on a business trip, so I had happily invited the 9-year-old over. With the turkey thawed and veggies prepped, I was excited to dress up the little apartment and create some magical Thanksgiving memories together. As I shifted the bags trying to grip my keys, I heard footsteps coming up fast behind me. An average-height bald man wearing black-rimmed glasses smiled broadly, holding up a Pyrex dish piled high with some type of casserole. "Happy Thanksgiving," he bellowed. "I'm Cliff from Unit 3E. Wanted to bring over my famous broccoli and rice hot dish for you and your company." I nodded thanks, though his eagerness unsettled me. I hadn't invited any neighbors or mentioned I was having company. Come to think of it, I couldn't remember ever seeing him around the building. I fumbled with the lock, eager to get inside. We exchanged a few more holiday pleasantries before I hurried up the stairs, sighing relief once in my apartment. But I froze when I peered out the window minutes later. There was Cliff lingering beside the building carrying an expensive camera, intently zooming the lens to focus on something. Was he taking photos of my unit? Later, as we feasted on turkey sandwiches and watched the parade after Hannah had trouble stomach pains, the buzzer rang. My heart dropped, instinctively knowing it was Cliff again. Over the intercom he cheerily offered to bring up some Pepto tablets he had on hand. I told Hannah to wait inside, discreetly locking her into my bedroom. I decided to confront Cliff to make it clear his attention wasn't welcome. But when I stepped into the hall, the lights suddenly cut out. I heard the stairwell door bang open and the sound of someone rushing up steps. I fled back inside my unit just as Cliff appeared on my floor, now wearing all black and muttering about how I shouldn't have been so rude. My hands shook as I double-bolted the front door. Why was this strange man tormenting me? From the bedroom I could hear Hannah begin to cry, frightened by the sudden darkness in the apartment. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket to call 911 as someone violently jiggled the doorknob. "I just wanted to be friends," Cliff shouted through the door. "But now you've made me angry. You're going to be sorry." The operator came on the line and I quickly explained I had an intruder trying to get into my apartment. The pounding and yelling at the front door reached a disturbing crescendo just as heavy-booted footsteps echoed from down the hall. Suddenly I heard a different male voice sharply command Cliff to get on the ground. To my immense relief, the police had arrived. As Halloween decorations still adorned the building lobby, we gave our statements under fluttering fake cobwebs. Apparently Cliff was not a resident, but a man who had become obsessed with me, even somehow disabling the electricity to gain access. As he was arrested for trespassing and stalking charges, I shuddered thinking how my attempt at a perfect Thanksgiving almost turned dangerously awry. Back upstairs, I hugged Hannah tightly, my frightening brush with the stranger having reminded me to appreciate the people you care about. Through rattled nerves and residual jitters from our ordeal, we managed to enjoy the rest of the holiday playing board games nestled safely in the comforting glow of candlelight. I was running late getting the turkey in the oven. My parents and sister were already on their way for our annual Thanksgiving celebration and I had overslept after working a late shift at the hospital the night before. I was frantically trying to prepare the usual spread: turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing. As I rushed around the kitchen, I glanced out the window and did a double take. There was a man standing in my backyard, partially obscured by the tree. He was just standing there staring at my house. I felt a chill down my spine. Who was this creep and why was he peering into my yard on today of all days? I tried to ignore him and went back to focus on the meal prep. A little while later when I peeked out the window again, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find a middle-aged man dressed in a billowy yellow suit with a wide smile spread unnaturally across his face. He introduced himself as my new neighbor from down the street and said he had come to bring me over some of his wife's famous pumpkin pie to welcome me to the neighborhood. Something seemed off about him, but I politely took the pie and thanked him. I was struggling to get the turkey cooked fully when the doorbell rang again. It was the neighbor in the yellow suit. He asked if my oven was working all right. He had noticed the turkey had been in for quite a while. Unnerved by his lingering presence, I said everything was fine and closed the door. But over the next couple hours he returned multiple times, always with some contrived excuse. My frustration mounting, I finally told him his attention was not welcome. His smile faded and he glared at me. I was just trying to be helpful and neighborly since you'll be all alone now, he hissed. Confused, I slammed the door. Why did he think I would be alone? That's when I got the call. My family had been in terrible accident and wouldn't make it after all. The day descended into a lonely nightmare, with only that strange man still lurking outside watching through the window.
Thanks for tuning in. I just shared the spookiest experiences of my life. Now, I want to hear about your hair-raising moments. Drop your scariest stories and tell me how you dealt with those spine-chilling situations. Let's swap some spooky tales.